News, play breakdowns, power rankings, storylines you never hear talked about anywhere else. It's all straight shots here, fired by straight shooters. S and Gun. This is the Objective Basketball Podcast.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Objective Basketball Podcast. S here, Lauren joining you as always. Lauren, how you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm back in Dallas with the fam for Thanksgiving. So
oh my god, I completely forgot it's American Thanksgiving. Can we don't have to do this podcast.
Yes, no. We're not even. We're celebrating tomorrow. So it's all good.
Okay.
It's all.
Oh my god, I completely even forgot. You know what? It's just my fault. It's
No.
So oh my god. So I'm working on this article for another website, Swish Theory. It'll be out by tomorrow or like the day after or whatever.
Yeah.
But I was working on this article and I was kind of like telling the guy, I'm like, oh yeah, maybe we can drop it on like Thursday. And like it didn't even register to me because I'm again, folks.
Yeah.
Not apply to me. You know, I had someone reach out and say, "Hey, happy Thanksgiving today. Love you,
really?
pal. Thank you very much." But also, I'm not having turkey today. You know.
So actually, I actually want to ask you about that. Is it maybe weird is like a strong word, but like if an American person says Happy Thanksgiving to someone that's not American, is that like? Like
no,
what is
whatever?
It's just like okay, okay.
Yeah,
because I'm like, is that inappropriate? Is that like?
No, I don't think it's inappropriate. No.
Okay. Just checking.
But you know, we have our Canadian Thanksgiving. It was like over a month ago. You know.
Oh wow.
And yeah, we were chilling. Yeah, no big deal. Anyways,
Okay,
happy
great.
Anyways,
Anyways,
I guess I should ask you.
Yeah.
What's your favorite Thanksgiving dish?
Oh, God,
like, what's your go-to?
So hard. That's so hard. My mom.
Also, are you a pumpkin pie person?
Yeah. I will say there is like food wise, I will always try anything, and pumpkin pie, pretty much everything at Thanksgiving is.
Yeah.
It's all a checked
game.
box. Yeah. So I am for the pumpkin pie. As far as my favorite side, my mom holds it down in the kitchen for our family Thanksgiving, and she can do no wrong. And so I would probably say I do like the classic mashed potatoes. It might be an unpopular,
if it's done
but
right.
when they're done right, it's like a simplicity that just ties it all together, man. Ties it all together. So yeah, it's good.
I'm a big stuffing guy.
Yeah, stuffing is actually that's
it's just really, really good. Like
when it's done, yeah.
I used to love stuffing so much that I would make my mom make stuffing outside of Thanksgiving.
Oh my gosh, it is very good.
It is so good. So yes, that's just a side point. By the way, pumpkin pie, fire. Pecan pie, fire.
True.
Banana
Very
cream
true.
pie. I don't know if you're a fan, but I
am a fan.
banana cream pie. I'll try anything as well. That's why you're my podcast co-host, ladies and gentlemen, because we will both are willing to try different types of food. Hell
there you
yeah.
Go.
Yeah. Hey, whenever we get to meet each other in person, we'll probably go out and try something random.
Oh yeah, that would be awesome. Hell yeah.
Okay. So basketball time. It is going to be, I think the final couple of days of in-season tournament are happening after Thanksgiving. So Friday is the second last day. Tuesday will be the last day. We already know the Indiana Pacers are headed to the knockout rounds. The Los Angeles Lakers are also headed to the knockout rounds. We'll see how the rest shakes out. We'll probably do a little podcast on that, next week, but ultimately very exciting. The Pacers, they look freaking awesome. And you know what? There's been a couple of different teams around the league that they look great. They look awesome. And then there are a couple of other teams that don't look great. They look kind of concerning. You have questions. And I actually think, since we're about a month into the season, almost a month into the season, pretty much a month into the season, it's a good time to do a temperature check, right? Maybe a little bit of true or false game. Okay. So I'm going to throw out a statement and ask you if it's true or false. And you are going to throw out a statement at me and I will say if it's true or false, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay.
I think we've both prepared a couple here.
Yes.
Whatever. I'm sure you have more than that because you're more well prepared than I am.
No, never. Oh, no, that is not. We both know that is not the case.
But I will let you go first. Go for it. Do your thing.
Okay. So mine, again, and I just want to preface, these are like forward thinking, but also based on what we've seen so far. So, okay.
Absolutely.
So my first one is Chet Holmgren will win Rookie of the Year.
Ooh, I like it. It's getting spicy. Let's go. Yeah. You know the Shannon Sharp Mountain Dew thing? He's like, ooh, yeah. Yeah. I love it. I love the take.
Good.
Yeah, look, a lot of stuff happening around the Oklahoma City Thunder today. Not going to get into that right now. But when it comes to Chet Holmgren, I think absolutely ding, ding, ding true. He is going to win the Rookie of the Year. I think he's on track to have the first ever rookie 50, 40, 90 season. And crazy. That's just incredible. Yes, he's in a great context. You know, it's like I was talking to Jackson Frank about this on the timeline, but it's like he is the perfect puzzle piece. It's like they have been searching for this exact player, and he's like, he fits in almost seamlessly with what they want to do. Between him, SGA, and J-Dub, they have this nice trio that just works very, very well. And yes, I think, yes, absolutely. Let me go and pull up Chet's stats real quick because, why not? We're a podcast. We should give people information.
It's crazy thinking back real quick, thinking back to that draft where he got selected to OKC because everyone kind of had, it was like, oh, what's going to happen with Paolo? What's going to happen with Jabari? Question marks, but everyone knew that Chet was going to OKC. And it was like, I remember some people being like, okay, this idea of this team should be putting the fear of God in people. And it's almost like everyone's just going to kind of like let it happen. And there's only so much you can do. Obviously you can't, there's only so much you can do, just but you could see it all coming together for OKC. And I think we all have sort of known that it's going to ultimately look like this. And so I think for OKC and OKC's fans, it's pretty phenomenal to kind of see it all starting to come together.
Yeah. Look, Chet Holmgren, 17 points per game, 55, 43, 87 shooting splits. He's averaging 8 rebounds, 2.5 assists, 2.5 blocks, 1 steal a game. I mean, that's just incredible work. It's really, really fire. And like, not to mention that Wemby is also doing some incredible things right now, but it's just the fact that they're on completely different contexts. And I mentioned this, like, this is something that I talked about in my previews. I said the conversation will have to come. It'll come down to efficiency, right? Wemby is being asked to be the number one option on a really poor team, right? He doesn't have the perfect context next to him. Hey, some people would argue he doesn't even have a point guard to play with him. You know, the Jeremy Sohan conversation has been a big thing. Yeah. The plus minus with him and Trey Jones has been a big thing. And that whole conversation. By the way, Greg Popovich, can I just, as an aside, what an incredible moment last night with him saying, hey, we don't boo in this house. We don't boo in this house. We don't do that. Some people saw that as like old man yelling at cloud, but I fucking loved it. I loved every second of it. There is not one coach in the NBA who has the cojones to get up on the mic and say, hey, 18,000 people, shut the hell up. Yeah. But Greg Popovich has that kind of power. I thought that was awesome. Did you see that?
I did see that. And I also think that, I'm glad you mentioned the word power because obviously fans are going to would listen to a coach like that. But when it comes from someone like Greg Popovich, as opposed to someone with just a little bit less clout, like if it had come from Will Hardy or somebody that's a little bit newer, a little doesn't have just the history and the clout. And so it was a pretty big moment. And so I think it was very interesting to watch. And I thought it was cool. I thought it was definitely entertaining. I thought it was
sick. And a little aside, it's it's a little free agency pitch to Kawhi Leonard. It's like, hey, by the way, you did leave on bad terms. We hated you. We misdiagnosed you. But also, if you want to come back, it's all good. There was a little bit of that.
For sure.
And I think that was funny. Okay, Wemby, 18.8 points per game, 43% from the field, 27% from three. He's chucking it a little bit there. 80% from the free throw line, 9.5 rebounds, 2.5 assists, 1 steal, 2.5 blocks. So, overall, their numbers are pretty similar. It's just the efficiency that pops up to you, which is the main difference maker here. And I think it's impressive what Wemby is doing. I really do. But ultimately, I if we this rookie of the year race is going to come down to splitting hairs because both of these guys are so talented, that I think you have to give it to Chet. So I'm going to say true on that regard. I think I'm going to say true. Do you agree with that? Do you think that it is Chet Holmgren wins the rookie of the year?
I do agree, and I do wonder like how it. I mean, I don't want to say how it will be received, but I feel like Chet has been put in a position where everyone knew he was going to have a big year. You know what I mean? And so it's just another situation where it might not feel like a 100% true rookie of the year race. I feel like there's
also
a little
like the Malcolm Brogdon,
like a little bit of like yet another like this. I think this could be a perfect example of another year where it's like, is this the right way to go about something? And personally, I don't know the answer because I mean, Chet has been phenomenal and he's obviously not playing like a rookie at all. He's playing like a guy who's been in a professional environment and Wemby has too. It's just, it's a bit of apples and oranges to me. And so
really
I do think, And so I think that's what sort of begs the question is that the right way to evaluate it? I don't know. I think it's interesting, and I think it's an interesting conversation, but I do think Chet will win it. I do think the efficiency, like you mentioned, the numbers, and also OKC's success so far, and what they may end up doing, I think will really kind of go in his favor for sure.
So the one thing I think of, right? I think of the rookie of the year race between LeBron James and Carmelo Anthony in 2003, 2004. Carmelo was on the better team. The Cavaliers were not a good team in LeBron's rookie year. In fact, LeBron kind of struggled efficiency-wise, much like Wemby is for the first couple months of his career. And the thing was, this is not me saying this. I was 8 years old, so I don't remember a lot of this stuff. I just remember, ooh, yeah, LeBron looks cool. But I remember Brian Windhorst saying on this podcast recently that the Cavs made a trade for Jeff McGinnis, a point guard. They did that halfway through the season, and LeBron started to look amazing. He skyrocketed in terms of his efficiency, everything like that. And I do wonder if something like that can change this race. Maybe the Spurs decide, hey, we're going to start Trey Jones now. And now Wemby's efficiency looks much better. He's catching it in his better spots. He's shooting better from three, et cetera, et cetera. He looks much better efficiency-wise. And now the conversation changes, right? So I think that's a part of it. And, if you look back to that rookie of the year race, Carmelo was on a better team in Denver. I think that team had just signed Andre Miller too. So like they were trying to be semi-competitive. I can't remember where they finished in the Western Conference, but ultimately they were trying to be a little bit more competitive than the Cavs were. And LeBron didn't make it to the playoffs until, year 2 or 3 of his career. I believe it was year 3. I think there's there's some interesting comparisons to be made here with that. Again, it's not an apples to apples comparison, but I do think that this thing could change as well. I don't think it's like a foregone conclusion that Chet's going to win it, like he's running away with it or anything. I think this thing will go back and forth as we progress.
Yeah, I agree with that too.
Okay. I've got a true or false for you. My true or false is a little bit different. This team has won 5 games in a row now. They just beat the Denver Nuggets last night. Obviously, Denver's suffering without Jamal Murray. The Orlando Magic are 10-5 to start the season. They are 4th in the Eastern Conference. True or false, the Orlando Magic will finish top 6 in the East this year?
Whew, that's a good one.
I'm not talking about playing. I'm not talking about none of that. I'm saying top 6. Do they finish? Yeah. Do they finish top 6?
Oh boy. Oh, this one.
Keep in mind, I will just say, keep in mind, Wendell Carter Jr. has played like 4 games for them. They have been without their starting center, essentially. They have also been without their starting point guard for a few games. Markelle Fultz hasn't played in a lot of these games as well. Now, they have depth in those areas, so they've been able to survive, but just want to put it out there. They haven't been at full strength either. So
that's a good I guess asterisk to put on it for sure. I hate my answer. I'm going to say false because
that's not a bad answer. Yeah.
And the reason I say false, and this is why I don't like my answer, it has more to do with the Pacers and what I'm seeing from Tyrese Halliburton and the fact that they still have some ground to make up, and that I think New York will ultimately finish higher than Orlando. And so I think that Orlando is going to find themselves below, at least New York and Indiana, and then that doesn't even touch on Cleveland and Atlanta, and then who knows if Brooklyn ends up going out and making a move. And so I think, unfortunately, the reason that I say false has more to do with other teams than it does with Orlando. But I think how they've come out to start the season, what's so crazy is how we look at how teams start seasons and how the narratives build around how teams start versus how they finish. A lot of times, I mean, there have been so many years for the Mavericks where they start off horrendously, but then they just have an incredible final push and it doesn't get recognized. It's like, oh, they still can't put it together around Luka, blah, blah, blah. And so for Orlando to come and make a statement so early, especially when you sort of have guys missing and big question marks, and not to mention, I mean, I just got done saying Brooklyn could make a trade. Orlando could go out and make a trade. You know what I mean? And so I think that they find themselves in a position where it's right there for them if they do want to take that step forward and, keep their foot on oh my gosh. Keep their foot on the
glass, baby.
Oh my goodness. Third time's a charm. But yeah, I think it's all there for them. I think health has always sort of been a big question mark with them, just with a few different guys. And so I hope that I'm wrong, and I hope that they stay up there because I think they're such a fun, feisty team. But I do think some of these teams that are a little bit more, maybe a little further ahead in their timeline in terms of just age and playoff readiness, I do think that those teams will potentially pass them by.
Yeah, I think you're right. And honestly, I only brought this up because I just want to talk about the Orlando Magic. I think
good. I love it.
It's a pretty good launching point for it. I would tend to agree with you. I also think false. I don't think they're going to finish top 6 in the East. It's tough. And for all the reasons that you mentioned, they're younger than all of these teams. There's just less of a margin of error. And especially there's less of a margin of error because they're not that great of an offensive team. Yes, they have offensive firepower. They have Franz. They have Paolo Banchero. I just mentioned they're missing a couple of their guys. I have a piece on Jalen Suggs coming out very soon. I got to interview Jalen Suggs, and that should be out. I mean, I hope at some point before this podcast, maybe not, but whatever. I got to interview Jalen Suggs, and he has clearly turned a corner in his career too. He's been absolutely awesome to watch. So they have like some guys, right? And I think there is a level of like, okay, this team can carve out something in the Eastern Conference. They're 21st in offense, which is why I think the margin of error for them is a little bit different. Now, to be fair, they've also, coupled that with the third best defense in the entire NBA so far this season. I think that's really, really important because a team like them, being so young, hanging their hat on the defensive side of the ball is going to show you just like the promise of what this team can be moving forward. And to your point, like sometimes we take the start of the season and we, overblow it a little bit. Sometimes we take the end of seasons and overblow them a little bit too. I remember, a couple of years ago, who was it? Was it the Wizards or something like that? But they had a really good final stretch, and we're like, hey, maybe the Wizards are better than what we think. And it wasn't true, right? Like it just wasn't true. So to be fair, it's hard to take a month and be like, this is who they are. But I also feel like this might be what OKC was last year or maybe the year before that, in the sense that they were toying with the play-in, got into the play-in, they got into it, they were feisty in the play-in game. Maybe they lose, maybe they win in that game, who knows? But like ultimately getting your guys, your young guys who are probably going to be stars in this league, in Paolo and Franz, getting those guys reps in postseason run, whatever it is, even if it's one single playing game, I think it's going to be really important for this team. And yeah, I mean, they've been awesome. I think they have the 7th best net rating for a starting lineup that has played more than 70 minutes together so far this season. And that starting lineup is, Fultz, Wendell Carter Jr., Franz Wagner, Paolo Banchero, and Jalen Suggs. Now, like I mentioned earlier, 2 of those guys haven't played for them in like a couple of weeks. So maybe they can even be better than they are now. And that's a scary thought to think of. I ultimately just think like this is a cool young team. They are thriving. They are doing really, really well. And I think we should highlight the fact that they're doing that. To be fair, to your point, Indiana Pacers are killing it too. Like I watched them last night. They were really hard to beat. And like Tyrese Halliburton looks incredible in all facets of his game. They can't stop a nosebleed defensively. I mean, the Raptors, one of the worst offensive teams in the league, scored 130 points on them. That's like crazy. That's a challenge in itself. But I think ultimately, like, Indiana is a really fun team to watch too. They can be like in play-in territory, maybe playoff territory if they make some noise. So I agree with you. False in that one. Throw me another one. Give it to me.
Okay.
What do we got?
This one's inching up on the spice meter. So okay. I've got to do. I'm pushing the timeline out on this one as far as the beginning of next season. So I think the trade would be pushing it a bit. So I'm going to say my true or false for you is all of the following. True or false, all of the following will be on a new team by the start of next season. Karl-Anthony Towns, Pascal Siakam, Zach LaVine, and Jordan Poole.
I will say true.
True on all of them.
Yes. I think it will be true on all of them. I think if I had to, rank it in likelihood, I think it's very, very likely that LaVine gets traded in the next couple of months. I would say Pascal is probably likely getting traded also in the next couple of months. I would say Karl-Anthony Towns, I think that's why you're saying next season. I think maybe that's a summer thing to address. I also think Jordan Poole is probably a summer thing to address. So, yes, I would say yes to all of those that they are going to get traded.
Interesting.
Yeah, what made you mention all of them together, I guess?
So I feel like if you were to do one or two, it would be an easy true. And I feel like if you had done it or if I had proposed it as by the end of this trade deadline, there are certain challenges that come within the next most immediate trade window. So I was like, how can I make this the most moving factors to think of? Okay, let's think of as many players as I see as reasonable, but then also within a reasonable amount of time that's in the near future. And so I do think that it's going to be really interesting. And I think the Jordan Poole situation has become sort of very interesting to see the conversation around him. Sometimes, I mean, we've seen conversations about players before be maybe not totally fair, and you just never really know. And so, I don't know. People feel differently about different situations and believe certain sources more than others. So it's sort of a situation that I'm like, I want to see how that plays out. But I think with Zach LaVine, I think he's definitely the most likely to get moved. And Karl-Anthony Towns and Pascal are kind of the two big ones that I think are going to have to take the right time and doing it, rushing it before this next trade deadline. Maybe with Pascal, but I'd say with both of them just feels a little bit soon to me. So we'll see. I hope I'm wrong. I hope it all happens in February because that would be that would be awesome.
Yeah, that would be crazy. I spoke with Dane Moore on the Timberwolves. We brought up the whole Karl-Anthony Towns situation, and he seemed to think that it's pretty much inevitable that Cat gets traded. Maybe not at the deadline, because the Timberwolves have been really good, and why break up something that's been good? But I think in the summer when the money starts to get really, really tight, yes, they will address that and try to move him for pretty much pennies on the dollar, unfortunately. Because, I'm
curious to see how their playoff, how the playoff picture, the playoff race, how all of that sort of transpires. To me, no matter how good their season is, that will be sort of what truly dictates the timeline of Cat's exit.
They got to win a playoff series. I think that's the goal this season. Is they have to win a playoff series is the goal, the objective. Minnesota hasn't won a playoff series since 2004, since Kevin Garnett was wearing the jersey. So they need to win a playoff series is my opinion about what the expectations are for this team. I think they can. I really do think they are well poised to win a playoff series. I guess it just depends on the matchup and who they go up against and whatnot. And it's funny because for my true or false, I have another Western Conference team that I'm kind of curious about. And it also relates to your trade topic. It does relate to your trade topic.
Amazing. Let's hear it.
Yes. True or false, the Sacramento Kings will make a trade for one of the aforementioned stars that you just mentioned.
Oh,
not Jordan Poole, because I don't think they trade for Jordan Poole. I honestly, by the way, I don't think anybody is really interested in trading for Jordan Poole.
I know.
Maybe the Toronto Raptors. You know what? I'm not going to sell myself. They're so they're so guard depleted that they're like, we will take anybody at this
just
point.
come on down.
Yeah, so I'm not sure. Hey, look, Masai, listen, low bargain. You know, you could probably get him for 2 seconds, but
yeah, probably.
Yes. So my true or false is the Sacramento Kings go big fish hunting at the deadline, and they make a trade for one of these guys. True or false? What do you think?
Oh man, that's a good one. So I'm gonna sort of take it from like a process of elimination point of view. I don't see Cat happening. So to me, it's either Zach or Pascal. Oh goodness, let me think, because
Pascal has quietly become my like Sacramento has become quietly my favorite Pascal destination.
Yeah, it would be super interesting. I think the thing that becomes most challenging about it is who comes back. You know what I mean? And I don't see Sacramento being willing to move a Keegan Murray in any situation. And so then it comes down to, does Toronto have any interest? I mean, maybe they do in Davion Mitchell and like a.
I think for starters, I think they would love Davion Mitchell. Like that's
I think he would fit really well.
Yeah. I don't know if that's enough for them to sell themselves on. We're gonna get like let's rewind a little, right?
Let's rewind.
2013 or 2012, 2013. Okay. The Toronto Raptors have this weird roster. It's not really working. It's Rudy Gay, DeMar DeRozan, and Kyle Lowry. It's all kind of finicky. It's wonky. They're winning games. They're also losing games they shouldn't be. Kind of feels like this season. All right. And it's a wonky fit, wonky roster. DeMar isn't getting the shine that he needs to. Kyle isn't getting the shine that he needs to because Rudy is taking up a lot of these shots. Okay. Go and search up the no, not this guy game winner that Rudy hit on the Toronto Raptors. Anyways, so the Raptors went ahead and traded with none other than the Sacramento Kings. They traded Rudy Gay to the Kings in exchange for Greivis Vasquez, Chuck Hayes, Patrick Patterson, and I think they probably got like a pick or like a second round pick or something along the lines of that too. My point is, none of those guys are in the league anymore.
Right.
Rudy Gay is still in the league. He's still kicking. I think he's on Atlanta. But he's not the player he is anymore. Greivis Vasquez, however, they were able to flip him, I think a year or two after that, in exchange for Norman Powell, a pick that became Norman Powell, and a pick that became OG Anunoby. So essentially,
unreal.
They built their entire future off of that Rudy Gay trade, with Patrick Patterson becoming a really important part of their little run that they had. And, Greivis Vasquez was important for a couple of years there. And then they turned that into Norman Powell and OG Anunoby. And obviously, we know what happens with Norman OG. I just think maybe there's a world in which that can happen here as well, where you're not getting a massive swing deal for Pascal, but you're getting, reserves. You're getting guys that can maybe fit this team a little bit more. Something that pops up is like, hey, what if the Kings are willing to move off of Kevin Huerter, right? Kevin Huerter fits the bill, shooting guy. That works well with Scotty Barnes. Okay, now you're talking about Davion Mitchell, Kevin Huerter, and like salary in order to get Pascal. And you're like, well, if that's the only thing they can get, maybe. And to be fair, there are other teams that could probably match that and do better. I'm not sure. But ultimately, I'm just thinking Sacramento is in a good position to go out and trade for one of these guys. So that's where my question comes of true.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you provided all that context because, one, I didn't know that, and that is amazing that is how that all came together. But I actually do think that I was initially going to say that Pascal, I wasn't going to put him as the most likely, but now I'm sitting here thinking, and I'm like, okay, let's just do the math on some of the guys that would move. At first, I was like, okay, Masai's going to want Keegan Murray. He's not going to get Keegan Murray. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's very, very hard for me to see.
And by the way, like there's a good chance that like that's the end of the conversation there. Like,
yeah,
they call,
and that's
like, hey,
exactly.
We want Pascal. They say no. They're like, no, unless you give us Keegan Murray, we don't want him.
Right. And so at first I was like, that's how that's going to go. It's not going to go anywhere. They're not going to get Pascal. However, they have their picks. a Harrison Barnes to match the salary, Kevin Huerter, and Davion Mitchell group, I don't hate that for Toronto. I think Toronto could potentially extend a Harrison Barnes return and get some significant usage out of Kevin Huerter and Davion Mitchell. And even though Kevin Huerter has been really solid for Sacramento, it just opens things up. Doing that deal opens things up for Malik Monk, and you can have other guys step up. So that deal, that package makes a lot of sense for Sacramento. So I do think that the Pascal situation is definitely one to monitor. And Davion Mitchell, there have even been times with him where it's like he's not going to get the opportunity that, like, when he got drafted, what it looked like he could become and how quickly he would be ready. It doesn't look like he's necessarily going to get that in Sacramento, and a place like Toronto could be exactly what he needs. So I'm going to go ahead and say true. I think with your history lesson, I think you have officially talked me in to Pascal to Sacramento. I love it.
And you know what? Like, it's not, to be fair, it's not just Pascal. Like, LaVine signed, when he was a restricted free agent, he signed an offer sheet with Sacramento to go there. This was before Monte McNair came there, so like there's history there, but still, like, maybe there's interest there for him to go there. A place that is closer to home for him, a place that is obviously has an incredible environment in terms of winning and whatnot. And I think Sacramento, you know, we talked about this a while ago when it came to like free agency, right? We thought they might go for Kyle Kuzma. We thought they might make a, you know, big swing trade for someone. And in the summer, they kind of stayed pat. And I wonder if they're regretting that a little bit, because they're 14th in offensive rating. Their defense has gotten better so far this year. They're 18th compared to, you know, last year where they were like 23rd or 24th. I do think, you know, they have a really, really good core, but the West around them has also gotten better. So maybe there is that hunger for them to go out and trade for someone. And also, by the way, it's not like you're going to be, as the Sacramento Kings, it's not like you're going to go out there and try to get a free agent, right? It's not like you're going to go out there and try to sign anybody. So what's the best way to do that? Go and trade for them.
Right. No,
and I just think that maybe gives me a little bit of thing.
Sure. Like, I think it really sets up nicely, because they're middle of the pack in a lot of different categories. And so even, you know, whatever your feelings are about a Zach LaVine fit, playing with pace and adding the scoring, like it does make a lot of sense, especially considering the narrative around Zach LaVine right now, and the fact that you could probably get him for a pretty friendly, like, team friendly price. And so I do think both are very possible options. I do think some of the other Zach LaVine scenarios that we have talked about make more sense, and I would expect those to be more likely, but the Pascal one is not something that should be overlooked at all. I think I could see that come together really quickly, in terms of Sacramento being like, hey, that's exactly the type of move we need to sort of get over the hump and really solidify a core, even more so than they have already done. And Monte McNair has shown that he is not afraid to be aggressive, super aggressive. So I wouldn't overlook that at all. So I like
would
that
be
one.
Interesting. Very would be interesting. One. Okay, we got two of these out the way. We'll probably do this thought exercise a little bit later on in the season, just because it's a good way to like temperature check certain things. Okay. Let's talk about our teams, the Toronto Raptors and Dallas Mavericks. First and foremost, let's talk about the Mavericks. You off air were mentioning that Derek Lively has gotten an injury. Is there any sort of update when it comes to that?
Yeah, so not a super solid update. It looks like it was officially announced as a lower back contusion, and we're still sort of waiting to hear what the next steps are. That's the last that I've seen. Hopefully, you know, by the time you're listening to this, there's more information on it as far as what the expectation of a timeline is. Hopefully it's something that doesn't take too long and that there's no serious structural damage, but he couldn't really walk, and he struggled to get up. So it did not look great. But it's also, you know, today's Thanksgiving, and so people being with their family, like, that could be a reason why we're not getting a whole lot of information. So maybe don't run and hit the panic button. But it didn't look great. And for big men and their backs, that's a huge concern. So we're just going to kind of take it one day at a time. But that was a rough fall, and hopefully he's good.
Hopefully he is. Yeah. I mean, look, he's been a big part of their entire season. I mean, we talked about this like earlier this season, where it's just like you know, I'm not saying to the same degree as Chet Holmgren, but like he completes that unit in a very, very specific way. as far as like a rim protector, shot blocker, and like he's not that level of impact yet, but eventually you see him becoming that. So obviously hope he stays healthy. I watched the tail end of their game against the Lakers in which they fumbled the bag extremely. But then, they kind of they stole one there. They escaped, if you will, Los Angeles with a W. They're still 10-5. I think they're 4th in the Western Conference. They are doing really well compared to like how they looked in the preseason. I guess my overall thoughts with you is like, okay, we're 15 games in now. That's probably near 25-ish%. Like it's not 25%, but it's almost 25%. How do you feel? Like how is the vibes of like what your expectation is for this season and what they might be?
I would say overall the vibes are good and the expectations are high. I would say last night's game was horrendous because you really started to see moments where the lack of offensive schemes and just the offense coming to a screeching halt and it looking like, okay, we've got solid players out there, but nothing is happening. And when that happens, that is like very, very concerning because it doesn't really look like anybody's doing anything to get out of it. And so that was tough to watch, and I'm glad nobody heard what was coming out of my mouth in my living room. But it was rough. But I think overall where they're at so far in the season, we've obviously talked about Dereck Lively, and like you said, like he mentioned, or how he completes the team. I completely agree with that statement. He not having him there will change the dynamic of the team, and we've seen it in 1 or 2 games already. And so I will say, got to give him credit where credit is due. Richaun Holmes stepped up last night, and he had a few specific moments where it was like, I have been waiting for this and calling for this because he doesn't have the size that Lively has, but his activity level, I think, is closer to Lively than it is to Dwight Powell. And I've been waiting for him to get minutes. And so I think that they're going to have a bit, if they do ultimately miss Lively, I think where they go from here after this, like, I guess, checkpoint in the season, so far things have been good. But if you lose Lively, it's a big sort of reevaluation. And so I think having Richaun Holmes step up and kind of show what he can do, in case anyone missed it after the game, Luka mentioned that he owed Richaun Holmes a dinner for how well he played. Having somebody step up like that is a really, really good sign. But I think it also even showed before Dereck Lively went out, it showed that Richaun Holmes getting minutes and even the Jaden Hardy, Seth Curry situation, that this rotation still isn't finalized. And so I do think that is something that they're still working out, which is why I feel good so far, but I still think that they've got some things that they need to work out, and that's going to take a bit more time. Did you lose me?
I did, but it's okay. I was waiting for you to finish, so I didn't. No, it's okay. I think we got it, though.
Where did you lose me?
I think I did lose you. Yeah.
Okay.
I think we got it, though. I think like it records on your side, so we don't have to worry about like you redoing it.
Okay. Well, great, because I was like, I don't want to have to re-say that because I feel like I said it well.
No, you're good. You're good. I'll just remember 37 minutes in.
Okay, great.
So the other thing I was going to say is like, it seems like they're figuring out their rotation a little bit more. Yeah. I see Josh Green, his minutes are getting up and up a little bit more than it was at the start of the season. It felt like he was like falling out of the rotation, but now he's back into the rotation. He's playing a little bit better. Is that just like, he's back and healthy or whatever? Or is like, what's the
deal? I honestly think that the initial inconsistencies with his minutes really stemmed from the surprise that Derrick Jones Jr. provided and how him getting in the starting lineup, because I think coming into this season, especially with Josh Green's extension, sort of like those conversations, it was expected that Josh Green was going to be in the starting lineup with Grant Williams, and that those two from a defensive standpoint were pretty much a lock. And then as we got closer to the start of the season, it was like, maybe it's not as much of a lock, and now there's this talk about Derrick Jones Jr. starting, and you and I talked about having someone like Maxey or him in there at the 4 to give them more size and have Grant sort of at this 3 position. And that has obviously panned out for them, which has sort of left Josh in this state of, where does he necessarily fit in? Because a lot of the bench wings that come in, apart from Dante Exum, are all offensive oriented. So that is like, okay, well then you should clearly have a need for someone like Josh Green. But they've got a lot of wing depth, which is crazy because for so long that was not the case. And so right now there's a bit of a log jam, which is also leads to inconsistencies with shooting and just the rotation overall. And so I think for Josh, I do think as this season kind of drags on and maybe some changes do happen from a roster standpoint, I think Josh fits very well with what they're trying to do, and he's shown improvement in areas that you almost wouldn't expect him. Like there's the areas that you do expect him to improve, but then others that you're like, whoa, he just hit a pull-up shot or like even a turnaround fadeaway, and you're like, right. I didn't see that coming. And so for Josh, I would be shocked if he went anywhere barring like a bigger trade. And so I think ultimately his spot in the rotation and also like his importance in terms of like, I guess when you're just looking at like the roster overall will become even more solidified once they sort of address this logjam of sort of the bench wings.
Yeah. Mavs also another team, by the way, that like maybe at the deadline could make some kind of move. I mean, we've talked about it, so I don't want to, kind of rehash, sure. But yes, it feels like they're also kind of
primed.
Like you said there's a little bit of a conundrum with their rotation a little bit, right?
For
like
sure.
Jaden Hardy's not getting a lot of minutes. There's like
Seth
where
Curry.
are you going to throw him? Yeah, Seth Curry too. It's like where do these guys kind of work in the pecking order? And I'm kind of curious to see how that shakes out.
Right.
As for the Toronto Raptors, if we were to record this on Tuesday night after their shellacking by the Orlando Magic, I would have a completely different reaction to you. I would say I can't wait till they blow this thing up, and we would be at the end of it here. It was a really bad game against the Magic. Yeah. They got absolutely destroyed. But I also think the Magic are just a tough matchup for them, to be honest with you. I think they're like a really, really tough matchup just because of the size. And the Raptors rely so much on their size. Great example is that Mavericks game, right? Like they clearly have the size advantage, and they took complete, they took over when it came to that Mavericks game, especially Siakam. I think that sort of applied to the Pacers game. It was almost identical the way that they won. They hammered in the paint. Pascal dominated once again. Scotty was really good as this like small ball 5 defensive type guy. And I think like for the most part, there's going to be matchups that are really, really good for this team because they're probably a little bit too one-dimensional, especially on offense. So there's going to be certain games where they look really, really good. In Indiana, they looked really good. In Dallas, they looked really good. In Orlando, they did not look good at all. And so I think that's probably part of it. But right now, it's like they kind of are what they are, right? They're about a 500 team. They're still working through the kinks of their offense and like figuring out what their identity is. If I had to do like a temperature check a month in, it still feels like this is just a bunch of like spare broken parts kind of working together to see what works. It just like the fit just isn't the greatest with a lot of these guys. It's pretty evident because like things look so much better offensively with Jakob Poeltl off of the floor. And that's not to say it always looks that way. Like Jakob still wins his minutes pretty consistently just because he's a good defender and he's a good passer, good rebounder, etc. But like for the most part, it really limits how effective both Pascal and Scotty can be on the floor together just because of the front court being so wonky and fit and like the spacing is off in those kind of lineups. Dennis Schroeder is punching above his weight at this point. So it's kind of like these guys are good players individually, but together they don't really fit. And I'm kind of curious to see what happens. Obviously, like I'm pretty tired of like coming on here every week and being like, well, we'll see what happens with the trades and whatnot. It feels like we're kind of just waiting for that to happen in order for us to have some kind of fresh conversation about this team, because for the most part, they are what they are. And the silver lining is like Scotty looks awesome. Scotty looks incredible. And he's putting up, all-star like numbers. It's like 29 and 6 a night. Like that's very, very good. And and by the way, like the fact that he's doing that on a team that doesn't necessarily like accentuate his skill set, like doesn't really harness what he can be good at, goes to show you like there's more there that can actually be tapped into. And that's an exciting part. But ultimately this team is what it is,
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Jakob because I did want to ask, and bear with me because this is a bit of a loaded question. knowing everything that we have discussed about Pascal and his maybe uncertain future with the team, and just considering what they sort of committed in terms of paying for Jakob to bring him in, where do you think, maybe operating under the assumption that Pascal is not a part of the long-term future, what do you think that means for Jakob's role with this team, and how that sort of shapes their identity moving forward in sort of a Scotty era with Jakob being committed to as the starting center?
Yeah, I think they don't want to tank. Even if they move off of Pascal Siakam, they really do not want to suck.
Right.
I don't think they have any interest in doing that. I think they're very comfortable being like a middle of the pack team and building from the middle and like just seeing what they have. I think that's going to apply even regardless once they trade Pascal. A lot of people are like excited to trade Pascal for a bunch of picks and young guys and like, let's start over. And I don't think the Raptors, that's their MO. I think like if they trade Pascal, they're probably going to trade him for guys who can help them now, plus picks, plus stuff like that, right? That's why the Kings pop up. It's like, okay, you know, Harrison Barnes can help you now. Kevin Huerter can help you now. Davion Mitchell might be able to help you now. And then like, you know, I don't know. I just think ultimately this team doesn't have any incentive to tank. So maybe when you remove Pascal from that equation, the fit with Jakob is a little bit better. Their chemistry is starting to develop more too.
Yeah.
Like the pick and roll stuff has looked a little bit better between Scotty and Jakob so far. And I think there is room for that relationship to grow, to be honest with you, on the court. I just think it's tough to have all three, unfortunately. And if I were to be completely honest, I think the Jakob Poeltl trade was essentially the death knell for the Pascal Scotty tandem, because it's just like a really tough front court fit with him. If it was Miles Turner, right, floor stretching, shot making big. If it was Kristaps Porzingis, floor stretching, shot blocking big, it's a different story, because that actually I think accentuates the Pascal Scotty tandem a little bit more. But because of what Jakob is as a player, like Jakob is like an elevated version of Richaun Holmes in the sense that he's like better defensively. He's like 7 feet tall, so he can block some shots and be this like shot deterror. But he works so much in the middle of the floor. He operates so much in the middle of the floor. And that's exactly where Pascal and Scotty operate. And it's just tough to have three guys try to operate the same areas of the floor without it being, you know, a tough fit. Yeah. Raptors land, man.
Yeah. I mean, it is tough. I think what you mentioned about Dennis Schroeder and punching above his weight, I like the way you phrased that. What I think is going to be so interesting, and again, I feel like everything is going to continue to tie back to the Pascal conversation and what happens there. So I apologize for you having to continue to say that or to think about that. But I do think that could also potentially, or not, I don't want to say I wonder if it will sway what the return package is and what they're more interested in. Would they be more interested in a Sacramento with maybe more draft capital and current assets plus a future asset and maybe Davion Mitchell? Or would they, you know, be more interested in something like a Jaden Hardy who might have maybe a higher ceiling than Davion Mitchell, depending on where you stand with that? Like how do they view the future point guard position and who's going to be running that offense? What do they view with that? And where that may go for them. I think that is going to be a really interesting sort of moving part to all of this whole Pascal situation, that I'm curious kind of what direction they may go. What prototype, let me ask you that. What prototype would you want the future point guard for the Toronto Raptors and a Scotty OG? What would you want that to look like?
I think the perfect player to pair alongside Scotty Barnes is like a Jamal Murray type, like a, you know, score first. He can make some plays for others. He can create, but for the most part is like a score first. I can get it in multiple different ways type of guard.
Sounds even a lot like Jaden Hardy
is another type of guy. Yeah, I mean Jaden Hardy does fit that bill. Yes, he absolutely does. I think like that's why with the Hawks, a lot of people were interested in AJ Griffin for the Raptors.
Yeah,
because AJ Griffin also fits that build of like that.
He's very solid.
So yeah, I mean, like that is the type of player you're looking for.
Interesting.
And I don't know Whether that's in the Raptors' plans, I don't know if that's something they envision, because the Raptors, again, don't like to go for those types of players. They just don't. But I'm curious to see what direction they go. And also, like, to your point with the Jakob thing, there's a world, because he came back to Toronto saying, I want to compete. Like, I want to be a part of something that's winning. And he wasn't in a winning situation in San Antonio. So I wonder if, once Pascal gets traded, the buck moves to Jakob, and like, hey, maybe they decide to trade Jakob Poeltl. And why did you trade a first round pick in the first place then, if that was going to be the situation? But look, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not going to end on a sour note. Scottie Barnes is looking like an all-star. If this sticks for the rest of until February, he will be in Indiana for the All-Star game. The Dallas Mavericks are doing great. The Toronto Raptors are what they are. We talked about the rest of the NBA so far in this podcast. Thank you, everybody else, for tapping into the Objective Basketball Podcast. As always, do the rating, the subscribing, the liking that you guys do, and we will see you guys later. Take care.
Follow hosts at Just S. Barahini on all socials and at The Lauren Gunn on Twitter. The Objective Basketball Podcast, delivering the NBA to you like no other.